I entered the courtroom. My son laughed, and Joss looked away in shame. The laugh cracked across the room like a whip. John leaned back in his chair, arms folded, mouth curled in a smirk that said he'd already won. Beside him, Joss fixed her eyes on the floor, cheeks flaming, manicured nails digging half moons into her palms. She knew. She just didn't want to watch. I walked the aisle in the same navy dress I'd buried my husband in. My steps were slow, deliberate, the click of low heels the only sound in a room suddenly holding its breath. Judge Malcolm Reed looked up. The blood left his face so fast I thought he might faint. His gavel slipped from his fingers and clattered on the bench. He whispered the name no one had dared speak in 20 years. The Iron Widow. John's laugh died mid-breath. But that moment was still weeks away. It really started at their dining table where I had become invisible. The table was 12 feet of reclaimed oak that cost more than most teachers earn in a year. I sat at the end reserved for unwanted guests, my plate of cooling chicken pushed aside like an unpaid bill. Joss flicked through her phone showing John photos of European ranges, the Lachange and Ivory or the Midnight Blue. John didn't look up from his laptop. Whatever photograph's better, babe. They talked over me, around me, through me. I was furniture that occasionally needed dusting. I tried anyway. The scholarship fund is short again. 2 seniors won't get their tuition. John exhaled like a man asked to move a mountain. Mom, we'll handle it. You worry too much. Joss gave me that tight, pitying smile. Winifred, you get mixed up with numbers now. It's okay. We've got it. Mixed up, okay, old. I swallowed the words and the chicken and excused myself early. That night, the pain came. It started as a fist under my ribs, then squeezed until I couldn't breathe. I knew the feeling. I'd felt it the night Robert died. I stumbled to the phone and called the main house. John answered on the 8th ring, voice gravel and resentment. Mom, it's 2:30. John, I can't breathe. I need help. A long, theatrical, you had one of those panic things last year. Take a pill. I've got the Henderson closing at 9. John, I can't breathe. Love you. Go back to bed. Click. Joss never even picked up. I called a cab. The driver kept glancing at me in the mirror while I clutched my chest in the back seat like a child afraid of the dark. At the ER, they ran tests, slid nitroglycerin under my tongue, and told me it was stress-induced angina, and sent me home at sunrise with a new prescription and one quiet warning. Reduce the stress, Mrs. Peterson. I almost laughed in the poor nurse's face. 2 weeks later, the knock came. Sharp, official, final. A courier in a brown uniform held a thick white envelope. Winifred Margaret Peterson? 78 pages that erased my name, my rights, my life. Petition for conservatorship. Petitioners, John Peterson and Jocelyn Peterson. Reason, advanced dementia, incapacity, danger to self. Attached, a psychological report by a Dr. Lyle Marrow I had never met, declaring me incompetent. I closed the cottage door, walked to my bedroom, and knelt on the floorboards Robert and I had nailed down together 45 years ago. I pried up the loose plank. Inside the fireproof box lay my old badge, still gleaming. Below it, a leather folder stamped classified, and beneath that, the photograph. Me, at 48, arms crossed, eyes cold enough to freeze a liar at 20 paces. They called me the Iron Widow for a reason. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I hadn't touched in 18 years. 3 rings. Winifred? A gasp. Then tears. Hello, Lydia, I said, voice steady as the first time I ever walked into an interrogation room. I need you. Somewhere inside my chest, something that had been asleep for 2 decades opened its eyes. I sat at the little kitchen table I painted butter yellow the year John started kindergarten, the petitions spread out beneath the same lamp that once lit his homework. 78 pages of surgical cruelty, page after page of lies, typed in neat 12-point font. Subject repeatedly leaves stove burners on, wanders property at night in nightgown, unable to recall names of grandchildren. There are no grandchildren. Then came Exhibit C, 37 handwritten incident logs in Joss's looping feminine script. Dates, times, tiny humiliating details. October 12, Winifred put milk in the pantry again. November 3rd, asked 3 times what day it was. December 19, found crying because she couldn't remember how to work the remote. I have never once cried over a remote in my life. I turned to the psychological evaluation. Stapled, official letterhead, gold embossed seal. Dr. Lyle Marrow, Ph.D., clinical neuropsychologist. The report was dated 4 days ago. I was supposedly examined for 90 minutes in my cottage while I was at the hospital having the stress angina. I read the conclusion twice. Mrs. Peterson exhibits profound cognitive impairment, consistent with moderate to severe dementia. Immediate conservatorship is required to prevent self-harm and financial exploitation by unknown third parties. Unknown third parties. That would be me, I suppose. I closed my eyes and felt the old rage rise, clean and cold, like well water pumped after a long winter. I have spent 31 years smelling lies the way other people smell rain. I can taste them on the air, and this room reeked. I carried the papers to the living room rug, laid them out like evidence photos, the way I once laid out forged invoices in shell company ledgers. I saw the pattern under 60 seconds. Every incident corresponded to a day John had asked me for money and been refused. Every forgetful episode followed a conversation about the scholarship foundation he and Joss were supposed to be managing in Robert's memory. The final page was the prayer, the legal request. They wanted total control. Person, estate, medical decisions, residence. They even requested permission to sell the cottage for her safety. I laughed then, one short, dry bark that startled a cardinal outside the window. I went back to the bedroom, pulled the fireproof box from its hiding place, and opened the leather folder marked Classified. Inside were the ghosts of cases past. A photograph of me standing beside a U.S. attorney while the school superintendent was led away in handcuffs. A newspaper clipping, Iron Widow brings down $42 million fraud ring. A letter of commendation signed by the governor himself. I had been the best the state ever had. Men twice my size trembled when I walked into a room carrying nothing but a legal pad and the truth. I left it all the day Robert's doctor said, months, maybe weeks. I walked out mid-investigation, turned in my badge, and never looked back. I told myself family was the only case that mattered anymore. I sat on the floor with the petition in one hand and a picture of 32-year-old John in my lap, gap-toothed, holding a trout almost as big as he was, and I finally let the tears come. Not for the lies, not even for the greed. I cried because my own son had studied me the way I once studied criminals. He had watched, taken notes, built a false narrative the way I once built airtight cases. He had weaponized every tool I ever taught him Observation, documentation, patience, and aimed them straight at my heart. He just never learned the last rule I lived by. Never pick a fight with someone who has spent her life learning exactly how people like you fall. I wiped my face, closed the box, and picked up the phone again. Lydia answered on the first ring this time. "I've read it," I said. Silence. Then very softly, "Winifred, I need you to listen to me. Dr. Lyle Marrow lost his license 5 years ago for billing Medicaid for patients who are already dead. He's a ghost for hire. And the payment trail? It leads straight to an account in John's name." I looked at the petition one last time, at my son's bold, familiar signature, next to Joss's elegant scrawl.
I hung up, walked to the window, and watched the lights come on in the main house, my son and his wife moving through rooms built with my husband's money, drinking wine bought with children's futures, laughing about the senile old woman they were finally going to be rid of. I spoke to the glass, to the reflection of a 74-year-old woman they had mistaken for prey. "Enjoy the celebration, John," I whispered. "It's the last one you'll ever have in that house." Then I opened the folder again, took out a fresh legal pad, and began to write. The Iron Widow was home. I knelt in the bedroom closet, the one place in the cottage Joss had never bothered to reorganize. The rug was still the same faded Persian Robert and I bought on our 20th anniversary. I rolled it back with the same motion I'd used for 23 years when hiding birthday gifts or Christmas cash from a curious little boy. The floorboard came up with a soft protest, the way it always had. The hollow beneath it smelled of cedar and old paper and something metallic, time maybe. The fireproof box waited exactly where I'd left it. I lifted the lid. First came the badge. Gold shield, State of South Carolina Department of Education, Office of Investigations, my name and title etched in black letters that hadn't faded a bit. Winifred M. Peterson, Director. Underneath, the leather folder, thick as a family Bible, stamped in cracked red ink, "Cases closed, classified, do not remove." I opened it. Photographs spilled across the rug like playing cards from a stacked deck. Me at 45, standing in front of a mountain of computers, while a sobbing school board chairman was cuffed behind me. Me shaking hands with a federal judge after the sentencing of the counterfeit diploma ring. Me alone in a conference room at 3 a.m., surrounded by color-coded timelines, eyes red-shot, mouth set in the line people learned not to cross. There was the commendation letter from the Attorney General, hand-signed, framed once, now curled at the edges. There was the front-page headline I kept for reasons I could never explain. Iron Widow ends 42 million theft, hundreds of careers in ruins. I ran my thumb across the nickname. They'd meant it as an insult at first. By the end, grown men whispered it like a prayer when they thought I wasn't listening. I had buried her the day Robert's oncologist said hospice. I had buried her so deep that I almost believed she was dead. Almost. I laid the contents out in perfect rows, the way I once laid out evidence for a grand jury. Every certificate, every sealed transcript, every photograph of handcuffed superintendents stared up at me like soldiers waiting for orders. The trembling in my hands stopped. The stooped shoulders straightened. The woman who shuffled to the mailbox every morning, who let Joss call her confused without a word, who apologized for taking up space, that woman folded herself up small, stepped aside, and quietly left the room. In her place stood the investigator. I took the badge, slipped it into the pocket of my cardigan the way I used to slip it into a blazer before dawn raids, and closed the box. Then I picked up my phone and dialed the number I still knew by heart. It rang twice. "Grant & Associates, this is Lydia." I smiled at the confident, clipped voice. Older, steadier, but still the same eager cadet who once followed me through filing rooms like a shadow. Lydia, I said. It's Winifred Peterson. Silence. Then the clatter of something hitting a desk. Mrs. Peterson? Oh my God. Is that really you? It's me, darling. Another beat of stunned quiet, then a rush of words. People said after Mr. Peterson passed, you just vanished. I tried to find you. I vanished on purpose, I said gently. But I'm back now, and I need the best lawyer I ever trained. She laughed once, half sob, half battle cry. Tell me what you need. I'll have a courier at your office in 40 minutes. Thick white envelope. Read it tonight, then call me. Winifred, what is this? My son is trying to put me in a cage, I said, voice flat and cold like a courtroom in January. I'd like to return the favor. I hung up before she could answer. I spent the next 2 hours doing what I had once done better than anyone alive, preparing a case. I made coffee, black, strong, the way I drank it during all-night audits. I pulled every financial statement John had ever emailed me for tax purposes. I printed the foundation's public filings and drew neat red circles around the line items that didn't exist 2 years ago. Botox, Birkin bags, a lease on a Porsche registered to Jocelyn Peterson. At 11:07 p.m., my phone rang. Lydia didn't bother with hello. Winifred, she said, voice shaking with fury and something that sounded like a lot of joy. He used a fake doctor, license revoked 5 years ago, and he's been planning this for 26 months. I've got the money trail already. I closed my eyes and felt the old familiar hum in my blood, the sound a hunter makes when the prey finally steps into the clearing. Good, I said. Then tomorrow we start digging. I hung up, looked at the badge in my hand, and pinned it to the inside of my blouse where no one could see. The grandmother was gone.
The Iron Widow had come home to roost. Lydia arrived at the cottage just after sunrise, 2 venti coffees in hand and murder in her eyes. She dropped a banker's box on my kitchen table like it was a body. "Open it," she said. Inside were printouts still warm from her printer, each stack rubber-banded and labeled in her precise handwriting. Stack 1, Dr. Lyle Marrow. Revoked license, 2020. Medicaid fraud, $840,000 billed for phantom patients. Current occupation, expert witness for hire, cash only, no questions. There was a grainy photo of Marrow, cheap suit, cheap smile, shaking hands with John outside a Starbucks in Columbia, timestamp, 6 weeks ago. Stack 2, John's financial autopsy. I flipped through pages of red numbers and felt the old, familiar chill settle in my spine. $1.8 million personal guarantee on a mixed-use development in Greenville's West End. Project bankrupt, contractor liens filed, city permits revoked. Foreclosure auction scheduled in 42 days on the house he bragged was paid off. Second mortgage, third mortgage, private lender at 18% interest, signature John Peterson. He had been bleeding for 2 years and hiding the wounds with better suits. Stack 3 made my stomach turn. The Robert E. Peterson Memorial Scholarship Foundation. Original balance at my husband's death, $2.4 million. Current balance, $41,312. The missing money hadn't vanished. It had been laundered through consulting fees and event expenses. Itemized receipts, each one signed by Jocelyn Peterson. $18,000. Gala decor. Photos showed Joss in a couture gown. $9,400. Venue deposit. Venmo to a med spa in Charlotte.
$28,000. Silent auction travel package. First class tickets to Paris for two. Names, John and Jocelyn Peterson. I set the Paris receipt down very carefully, as if it might explode. Lydia watched me, waiting. I know he hasn't had it to the bar in 20 years, but he knows the tricks, I said, hearing the words come out flat and clinical. He did this because the bank was about to take his toys and he needed new ones. Mine. Lydia nodded once. The conservatorship petition isn't about your mind, Winifred. It's about your money. They want to liquidate everything you own, cottage, pension, the last of the foundation, before the foreclosure clock hits 0. I looked out the window at the main house. John's Porsche gleamed in the driveway like nothing was wrong. Joss's white Range Rover sat beside it, fresh from the detailer. I thought of the night I begged them to drive me to the hospital. I thought of the forged incident logs. I thought of the fake doctor paid in cash while I was clutching my chest in an emergency room alone. The rage was there, but it was cold now, useful. I took a long breath. "How much time do we have?" I asked. Lydia said, "The emergency hearing is in 9 days. They paid extra for an expedited calendar." I smiled. It felt foreign on my face, like a muscle I'd forgotten I owned. "Good," I said. "That gives us 8 days to buy everything he owes." Lydia's eyebrows shot up. "You wanna... what?" I was already reaching for my phone, scrolling to a contact labeled only R. Caldwell, Private Credit. John's biggest private lender is a man named Ray Caldwell. Ray owes me a favor from 2009. He tried to hide embezzled bond money in offshore accounts. I let him keep his knees. Lydia started to grin. I pressed call. Ray picked up on the second ring, voice like gravel and bourbon. "Whoever this is, you're interrupting my tea time." "Ray," I said, calm and pleasant. "It's Winifred Peterson." Silence. Then the sound of a golf cart braking hard. "Mrs. Peterson, ma'am, how did you—" "I'm calling in the marker, Ray. The $1.2 million note you hold on my son's development. I'll wire payment in full by noon tomorrow. You'll assign the note to a trust in my name. No questions, no publicity." Another long silence, then a low whistle. "Yes, ma'am, whatever you need." I hung up. Lydia was staring at me like I'd grown wings. "By tomorrow night, I will own the roof over their heads, the cars in their garage, and every dime they still pretend is theirs." I looked at the scholarship receipt again, Paris for two, and felt the last piece click into place. This isn't betrayal. It's desperation wearing my son's face. Lydia closed the banker's box and slid it toward me like a loaded weapon. "Then let's give him something to really be desperate about." The cottage became a war room. My kitchen table disappeared under color-coded folders. The butter-yellow walls I once painted with John's tiny handprints now held whiteboards covered in timelines, arrows, and dollar amounts circled in blood-red marker. Lydia worked from dawn until the early hours, laptop glowing, printer coughing out page after page. I worked the phones. Old numbers I swore I'd never dial again lit up like a switchboard from 2003. A retired forensic accountant in Charleston who still owed me for saving his daughter's teaching certificate. A deputy superintendent who once cried in my office when I proved he was innocent. A private lender in Atlanta who answered on the first ring and said, "Anything, Mrs. Peterson, name it." By the third day, I had the full picture. $3.4 million in total liabilities, 17 separate creditors, and every one of them suddenly eager to sell at a discount when they heard who was buying. Ray Caldwell's $1.2 million note was only the beginning.
I formed a blind trust, Palmetto Preservation LLC, registered to a law firm in Columbia that had never heard the name Winifred Peterson. Lydia signed as trustee. Money moved through 3 shell accounts and landed exactly where it needed to be. By Friday night, I owned the first mortgage on their house, the second and third as well, the Porsche, the Range Rover, the boat they never launched, the failed West End development that was supposed to make them rich, every dime of John's corporate operating credit line. He still thought the banks were breathing down his neck. He had no idea the wolf already owned the door. Lydia came through the back door at 2:14 a.m., carrying a flash drive like it was nitroglycerin. She need to hear this, she said. She plugged it into my laptop. John's voice, recorded 3 months ago on a call with the fake doctor. She's old, she won't fight. By the time she figures it out, the judge will have signed and will already have power of attorney. Just write the report however I tell you. Cash is in the usual place. I listened to my son sell my mind for cash the way other people sell used furniture. When it ended, Lydia was watching me carefully. I closed the laptop. "Thank you," I said. She waited. I stood, walked to the window, and looked at the main house. Every light was blazing. John was probably pacing the marble floors, rehearsing his concerned son speech for the judge. Joss was probably packing my things into boxes labeled charity. I turned back to Lydia. "I filed everything," I said. "Bank records, the forged logs, the scholarship theft, the emails, the recording. Seal it. We open it all in court." She nodded once, sharp. I touched the badge hidden inside my blouse, the one I now wore every day like a second heart. "He has no idea who he's challenging," I said, so quietly the words barely stirred the air. Lydia smiled for the first time in days, a small, fierce thing. "Neither does she answered. Outside, the moon hung low and cold over the house my husband built with honest money. I stared at it until the lights inside went dark, one by one. "Sleep, John. Sleep, Joss. You're going to need the rest." The certified letter arrived at 9:03 a.m., delivered by a deputy sheriff who refused to meet my eyes. "Emergency hearing, L.A. Superior Court, Department 4, 48 hours notice. Petition for conservatorship of Winifred M. Peterson." 48 hours. They couldn't even give me a week to die with dignity? I stood on the porch holding the envelope and watched John across the lawn, laughing with the landscaper, loud enough for the sound to carry. "She's finally going into a home," he said, clapping the man on the shoulder. "Peace and quiet at last." The landscaper gave an awkward chuckle and fled to his truck. By noon, the country club WhatsApp was humming. Joss at brunch, "We're just trying to protect her money before she gives it all to some telemarketer." Joss again, voice syrupy with fake tears, "It's breaking our hearts, but the doctor says she's a danger to herself." I read every message Lydia forwarded me, each one a small, precise cut. That night, I couldn't sleep. The cottage felt too small, the air too thick. I opened the trunk in the spare room, the one I hadn't touched since the week Robert died, and pulled out an old photo album. John at 7 caught stealing candy from the corner store. I'd paid the owner double and told John we'd never speak of it again. John at 14 suspended for fighting. I'd marched into the principal's office and convinced them that my son was going through a phase. John at 17 wrecking my car after drinking at a lake party. I'd paid for the repairs, grounded him for 2 weeks, then let him take the car again because senior year only happens once. Every time I had stepped in front of him, arms wide, taking the blow meant for him. I had taught him that consequences were things that happened to other people. I had taught him that love meant never having to say you're sorry. I closed the album and felt something inside me finally break. Not my heart, but the last soft part that still believed he might change. At dawn, Lydia pulled into the driveway. She stepped out of the car carrying a single black litigation bag and a thick manila folder sealed with red tape. She handed me the folder. Inside were the originals of everything we had gathered. Bank assignments, the recording transcript, the scholarship theft ledger, the fake doctor's rap sheet,
and on top, a crisp new document titled Motion to Dismiss Conservatorship with Prejudice and Request for Criminal Referral. I looked up. The sun was just clearing the pines, painting the big house gold. "Tomorrow," Leah said, voice steady as stone. "We end this." I tucked the folder under my arm like a rifle. "Yes," I said, "tomorrow." I walked back inside, laid the navy funeral dress across the bed, and pressed it smooth with hands that did not shake. For the first time in decades, I was eager for morning. I stepped through the heavy oak doors at exactly 8:57 a.m. The laugh hit me first, loud, ugly, triumphant. John was already seated at the petitioner's table, leaning back, arms spread like he owned the room. When he saw me, his mouth twisted into that same smirk he'd worn at 15 when he knew he'd gotten away with something. Joss sat beside him, eyes fixed on the table, shoulders curled inward. She looked smaller than I'd ever seen her. I walked the aisle alone. Navy dress pressed, low heel steady, hair in the same severe knot I wore the day I buried my husband. Every step echoed. The gallery was packed. Neighbors, club friends, a few reporters who smelled blood. Phones were already out. Judge Malcolm Reed looked up from the bench. I watched recognition hit him like a bullet. His face went ash white. The gavel slipped from his hand and cracked against the wood. He whispered it, just loud enough for the first row to hear. "The Iron Widow." A ripple went through the room. Someone actually gasped. John's laugh died mid-breath. Lydia was already on her feet. She didn't wait for the judge to call the case. "Your Honor, before we waste the court's time with this fraudulent petition, we move to dismiss and refer this matter for criminal prosecution." John shot up. "Objection! This is ridiculous." "Sit down, Mr. Peterson," the judge barked, voice cracking like a whip. John sat. Lydia clicked the remote. The screen behind her lit up. First slide, Dr. Lyle Marrow's revoked license stamped in red. Surrendered. Fraud. Second slide, bank records. $15,000 wire from John's personal account to Marrow 3 days after my hospital visit. Third slide, the Scholarship Foundation ledger. One column, money in. Second column, money out, labeled cosmetic consultations, personal styling, European vacation. Joss made a small, wounded sound. Fourth slide, still photos from the Paris trip pulled from Joss's own Instagram before she could delete them. The gallery erupted in whispers. Lydia turned to the judge. "And finally, Your Honor, the court should hear how concerned this loving son was about his mother's health." She pressed play. John's voice filled the courtroom, tinny and cruel through the speakers. "She's old. She won't fight. By the time the old bat figures it out, we'll have power of attorney and the house will be in escrow. Just say she's crazy. Cash is in the usual place." Dead silence. Then Joss broke. Not quiet tears, full, choking sobs, hands over her face that she could hide from her own receipts. John lunged across the table. "Turn it off. That's taken out of context." The judge slammed the gavel so hard the handle cracked. "Mr. Peterson, you will remain seated and silent, or I will have you removed in cuffs right now." 2 bailiffs were already moving forward. John sank back into his chair, mouth working silently, eyes darting like a trapped animal. The room was chaos. Flashes from phones, reporters scribbling, someone in the back row actually crying. Judge Reed removed his glasses, rubbed the bridge of his nose, then looked straight at me. His voice was very quiet, almost reverent. "Mrs. Peterson, what do you wish to do?" Every eye turned to me. I stood. The courtroom fell silent again. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "Let the record reflect," I said, clear and calm, that I am of perfectly sound mind, and I move this court to dismiss the petition, open a criminal investigation into fraud, theft, and elder abuse, and grant whatever restraining orders are necessary to keep these two people away from me and my property. I paused, looked at John, really looked at him for the first time in years. He couldn't hold my gaze. The judge picked up his pen. So ordered. The gavel fell like a gunshot. The gavel was still ringing when I rose again. I did not rush. I did not smile. I simply opened the thin black folder Lydia had slid across the table and removed 5 crisp documents, each bearing the raised seal of a different lender. "Your Honor," I said, voice steady enough to cut glass, "before the bailiffs take my son into custody, there is one more matter the court should be aware of." I turned to the screen. Lydia clicked once. The first assignment of mortgage appeared. $1.9 million, recorded yesterday, now held by Palmetto Preservation, LLC. Second click, the second mortgage. Third click, the third. Fourth click, vehicle titles, Porsche Cayenne, Range Rover Sport, the ridiculous speedboat still shrink-wrapped in the side yard. Fifth click, the failed West End development, deed in lieu of foreclosure, signed over to the same trust 2 days ago. Sixth and final click, John's corporate operating account, frozen this morning, balance $11.43. Lien holder, Palmetto Preservation, LLC. I let the silence stretch until it hurt. Palmetto Preservation is a trust of which I am the sole beneficiary, I said. As of this moment, I own the roof over their heads, the cars in their driveway, the project that was supposed to save them, and every penny they have left in the world. John made a sound, like air leaving a punctured lung. He stared at the screen, then at me, then back at the screen, as if the numbers might rearrange themselves if he looked hard enough. They didn't. He stood slowly, chair scraping, hands flat on the table to keep from falling. "Mom," his voice cracked like a boy's, you bought my debts?" "Every single one," I answered. Joss was sobbing openly now, mascara rivers down her cheeks, but John didn't even glance at her. All the arrogance had drained out of him, leaving something small and pale. The judge cleared his throat. "Mrs. Peterson, do you wish to pursue foreclosure at this time?" "No, Your Honor. I wish to give them 30 days to vacate the premises. After that, the locks will be changed." John's knees buckled. A bailiff caught him by the arm before he hit the floor. "Conservatorship petition is dismissed with prejudice," Judge Reed declared. "Criminal investigation into fraud, theft, forgery, and elder abuse is hereby ordered. Deputy, take Mr. Peterson into custody. Mrs. Peterson," he stopped, looked at Joss, still weeping, then at John, now cuffed. "Remove them both."
The gallery exploded, cameras flashing, voices rising. Someone in the back shouted, "That's the Iron Widow!" John twisted against the bailiff's grip as they dragged him past me. His face was wet, eyes wild. "Mom, why?" he whispered. The same words he used at 12 when I found the stolen cigarettes, at 17 when I paid for the wrecked car, at 25 when I signed the first check for his failing business. I looked at him, really looked, and answered with the truth he had never been forced to hear. "Because you left me no choice, John." The doors closed behind them. The courtroom went still. I gathered my papers, smoothed my dress, and walked out the same way I had walked in, head high, heel steady, the sound echoing like a verdict. The hallway outside the holding room smelled of bleach and old coffee. I stood against the cinder block wall in my navy dress, hands folded, waiting. A deputy opened the door and stepped aside. John shuffled out in cuffs,
orange jumpsuit, already swallowing the man who once wore $5,000 suits. His eyes were red, hair uncombed, the arrogance scraped clean off. Joss was nowhere. She had been taken through another door. Even now, she couldn't face me. John stopped 2 feet away. The deputy stayed close, but far enough to give us the illusion of privacy. "Mom," he whispered, voice raw. I needed help. The project collapsed. We were drowning. I didn't mean—" He tried to step closer. The cuffs rattled. "I never wanted to hurt you. I thought you'd never even notice the money was gone. You have so much and we—" I let him talk until the words ran out, and only the shaking was left. When he finally looked up, eyes pleading like the little boy who once fell off his bike and waited for me to kiss the hurt away, I spoke. "I didn't destroy you, John." A flicker of hope crossed his face. I finished the sentence. "I stopped protecting you." The hope died. "You are 47 years old enough to know that love is not a blank check, old enough to know that consequences are not cruelty, they are gravity. I spent your whole life catching you before you hit the ground. Today, the ground finally caught you." A single tear slid down his cheek. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I know. But sorry doesn't put the scholarship money back in those children's accounts. Sorry doesn't unwrite the lies about my mind. And sorry doesn't make you my little boy again." I turned to go. "Mom." I paused, but I didn't look back. "Goodbye, John." The deputy led him away. His shoulders folded in on themselves, and the sound of his crying followed me all the way to the exit.
Outside, the morning was bright and clean, the kind of Carolina October light that makes everything look newly washed. Lydia waited at the bottom of the steps, sunglasses on, arms open. I took the hand she offered. Together, we walked down the courthouse steps, past the cameras, past the whispers, past the life I had let shrink me for far too long. The Iron Widow was 74 years old, penniless by some standards, richer than she had ever been by the only one that mattered. She was free. And for the first time in decades, she was finally, completely at peace. If this story of justice, redemption, and a grandmother's unbreakable strength moved you, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because every week we bring you real revenge stories that remind the world never underestimate the quiet ones. The next one might just be about someone you know. See you in the next video.